You all may be seated. First and foremost, can we please have a round of applause for the youth group band? And today is the day. Today is the day that I get canceled for saying something inappropriate on stage. I feel it coming. But I want to preface that today's message and why we're doing Youth Sunday and why we're having all of the different kids from our youth ministry touching different aspects of our church, whether it is the AV team, whether it is the Connect team and welcoming people, whether it's the praise and worship team or announcements, is it's never too early to start serving God. And as Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12, let no one look down on your youthfulness, but rather in speech, rather in conduct, rather in love, in faith and purity, show yourself an example of one who believes. And what's really great about our ministries here is, as you can see, there's a lot of different kids serving in different ministries, but we're serving the same God. And as part of our youth group, we actually have a mission verse, which is Romans 12:1-2, and that is what we're living out today. I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your body a holy and living sacrifice. This is your spiritual service of worship. And that is what we're trying to teach in our kids. And that's why us as Southwest Community Church, and we really value in being a discipleship-based church, is being able to look and identify certain talents. Because I'm a firm believer that God has blessed each and every one of us, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, whether you're an elder, whether you're a parent, whether you're in college, wherever you are in your life, He's given you a set of skills and talents to cultivate, to grow, and use to bring Him glory. And I'm reminded of a time that when I was first starting in youth group, and I was so passionate about my relationship with God, and I was getting involved with the church, Cody had approached me with an opportunity. He said, hey, Dylan, you're very bubbly, you're a very good with people person, you have a high energy. How do you feel about doing announcements for youth group? And although I was really excited about the opportunity, I never thought this was something that I was going to do. I never thought this is something that I was capable of doing. But because Cody identified that opportunity, I was able to see how through the grace of God and through me being obedient, I was able to push myself beyond something that I never would have thought I was capable of doing. And that's what our goal is in our youth ministry, to be able to teach the kids to not conform to the world, but to be transformed and renewing in mind. And when it comes to the message of today that you guys are about to hear, when it comes to the fact that we as parents, we as adults are meant to teach our kids something, I hope after today's message you will realize there's a couple of things that you could learn from your kids, especially when it comes to faith. Now, I want to start first by asking you guys to transport in your mind back to a time when you were a child, okay? I want you to think about what your favorite toy was. Because me as a kid, it was Legos. Me and my cousin Nick, we would be playing at our grandpa's house for Legos hours and hours on end. And this time as a child, it was a time where creativity and imagination was just a part of life. I didn't think about the no's. I didn't think about the roadblocks. I didn't think about the limitations of what you can and cannot do. It made perfectly good sense that a Star Destroyer and Star Wars could fly over the mountain at Tropical Park. It just made perfect sense. I turned my dreams into realities. But something that we've learned is as you grow older, your creativity begins to fade away. I read a very, very interesting article that speaks on the fact that creativity levels in children and adults astronomically begin to degrade over time. According to this study by NASA, over 1,600 kids between 4 to 5-year-olds were tested on their creativity, and 98% of them scored at a genius level. Fast forward 5 years later, only 30% of those same kids tested as a genius. Add another 5 years, only 12%. And when they did the same test to adults, do you guys know how many tested? Only 2%. So it's a proven fact that as you grow older, your creativity begins to fade away. That is why also when we're talking about being a kid again and people want to access this youth, nostalgia is such a big part of marketing. Okay, your favorite movie is rebooted for the 80th time. Your show is brought back with all the actors who have not aged well at all. You think about the video games, the toys that you played with, and you're introducing it to a new generation. And it's because nostalgia is an essential part of how we deal with life's transitions. We just want to access that youth again. And what's really interesting about this article is it discusses 4 proven ways through research and different studies on how you guys, us as adults, can rediscover our creativity. So number 1 is to go for a walk while listening to happy music. The science behind this is the fact that children are effective divergent thinkers, that they're able to generate creative ideas by exploring many possible routes. So there was actual research showing that when you walk and then you're listening to happy music that they define as classical with a positive vibe, that you're able to improve your problem-solving thinking skills. So that's 1. Number 2 is let your mind wander. Now, this might seem counterproductive, but this kind of plays into the role that as kids in elementary school, the number 1 thing we do all day is what? Daydream. And what this teaches is that when we're presented with a problem, the research showed that people who rested, and instead of just jumping into it trying to solve, but they actually stopped to think about it and think about all the possibilities, they came up with more solutions. So take a moment to daydream. Thirdly, partner and think with actual kids. Creativity is just like a muscle, like your body. You go to the gym to work on your biceps, your triceps. You could exercise your creativity through different exercises. Something they say is through brainstorming, thinking like a kid, and next time you're presented with a problem, take your kid to the dinner table, pull out Legos, pull out toys, and use those in your brainstorming session. Because what they're saying is you could think beyond all of the thoughts that you just write down on a piece of paper. And lastly, imagine the best case scenario. This one is talking about the importance of youthful optimism and the fact that studies have shown that when we immerse ourselves in joyous doing rather than anxious mulling, we're able to increasingly improve our problem-solving skills. So next time when you're presented with an issue, instead of thinking about the 1,000,001 reasons of why it's going to not work, think about the ways it can work. So you might be asking, why are we talking, Dylan, about creativity? Well, I think just as we've highlighted in creativity, our faith as we grow older can greatly diminish. When you look at children growing up, they're just living their lives. They're doing the things they love, they're learning, they're growing. And probably the most insightful thing about children is that they identify themselves through their parents. But there comes a certain point when we grow older that we no longer identify ourselves as certain parents. No longer that I'm Dean or Lucia's son. No longer that is Heather's son, Jared, or that is Gino's daughter, Alyssa. We come to form our own identities. And with that, we start to identify ourselves in many things. What we do, our jobs, our paycheck, our friend groups, our following on Instagram. And as adults, no matter how we try to avoid it and say we don't let it tie us down, we do let social status get in the way of how we identify ourselves. And that's why I'm reminded of a passage in Matthew. Jesus was talking to the disciples about the cure for anxiety. And what I love about this is anytime you mention the word anxiety, people are like, oh, that's trendy, that's a buzzword. Anxiety is just an excuse people use to avoid talking about their real life problems. Anxiety is a real issue because Jesus preached about it over 2,000 years ago. So in Matthew chapter 6, if you turn to verse 25, you're going to see how Jesus talks to the disciples about anxiety. So in verse 25, Jesus says, "For this reason, I say to you, do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food and the body than clothing?" What I'm reminded about here is the fact that when I was a child, I never thought about my parents failing me. I gave them 100% trust. I knew that they were going to take care of me. I never doubted that my mom was going to feed me. I never thought my dad isn't going to clothe me. Actually, I specifically remember many shopping trips that me and my dad took, okay? And my dad, being the lawyer that he is and thinking ahead, and the fact that I was the only boy in the family, and had no other clothes. He dressed me for 3 years in the making. So here I was a trendsetter. I had baggy parachute pants. I had shirts that were really long. And I didn't walk around thinking, wow, I'm weird. I thought, this is what my dad wants. There's other kids with khakis that fit perfectly at their ankle. There's a shirt, a polo shirt that doesn't look like you could fit 3 other children in it. I thought my dad had a reason for this, and I trust him. And so many times in our faith, as we get older, we lose that trust in God. And just like our faith, it slowly begins to fade away, just like that creativity. All of a sudden, that faith has a new partner in town, in your heart. It's called skepticism. All of a sudden, there's cynicism, there's worries, there's doubts, there's anxieties, there's anger when things don't go to plan and you're questioning, why am I at this particular point in my life? And that reminds me of a time, again, where I was right before college, where I was struggling to figure out what major was I going to do. I had so much anxiety. I would work at my dad's office and clients would come in and say, hey, Dylan, you're a bright kid. What are you studying in? And I had no clue. And I felt that pressure. 2 of my sisters, when they were little, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. One of them a lawyer, one of them an artist. And they had a track for their path. They knew the classes they had to take. They knew the skills they had to learn. Meanwhile, here I am not sure of what I want to do. And something that I learned through this process is something very important. And I call it the never-ending cycle of the unknown. I thought once I figure out what my major is, my life's set. I'm not going to have any other questions. But then I learned it became, well, what am I going to major in turned into the next question. Where are you going to go to school? Where are you going to go to school turned into, well, where are you going to intern? Where are you going to intern turned into, where are you going to work for your career? You think I'm done? No. When are you going to get a promotion? When are you going to get a pay raise? Then you think, all right, I'm done. Then it turns into your personal life. Who are you going to date? Who are you going to marry? When are you going to get married? Where's the marriage going to be at? When are you going to have a child? When are you going to have a home? And that cycle continues on and on, even in your children's life, because then people begin to ask questions about your children. Well, how are you going to raise them? Where are you going to take them to school? It just continues and continues. And if we let that control us, it's going to cripple us. It's going to paralyze us because we're constantly looking for validation in a social status and not in the fact that we're children of God. I can think of no greater example of someone who is looking for a sign, because when we are in this situation and when we feel lost, sometimes you just have that moment of, God, can you please reveal yourself to me? Can you please show me, give me a sign, something? I trust you, I believe you, but I would just like a little bit of validation, I'd like a little bit of evidence. And the person I like to think about is Moses. Now, a couple weeks ago in youth group, and we have this picture of Moses, I asked the kids what they thought of. One word to describe Moses when you see this picture. And all I heard from the kids is, he's a hero. He's a commander. He's a prophet. I was like, that's not the word I'm looking for. It starts with an I. And then they were like, okay, he's intelligent. He's innovative. And I said, no, he's an idiot. That was the word I said. Now, let's hear me out. I'm going to explain why I think he's an idiot. It has nothing to do with the fact that he has a stuttering problem. People have that, and it's a condition they're able to work through it. That's not why he's an idiot. It wasn't because he had a stuttering problem. It was because Moses had a severe faith problem. Okay? We're going to turn to Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. And to give you some context here, this was God preparing Moses for leading the Israelites out of captivity with the Egyptians and Pharaoh. And Moses was looking for that sign, right? He was looking for God to reveal himself. And this is how God chooses to do it. Moses is walking along the forest, working in the land, and all of a sudden he sees a burning bush. Okay? A burning bush that's remaining intact. It's not burning to shrivels. And it starts to talk to him. It says, now Moses was pasturing the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountains of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. Yet the bush was not being consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burning up. To make the story even more interesting and the sign even more clear, all of a sudden a bush started talking to you. How would you guys react? Have you ever encountered a bush talking to you? Unless maybe you're from Hialeah. I think it happens there. But, he says, when the Lord saw that he turned to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. You say that's a sign, right? Showcasing God and his faithfulness, is showing his power, that you could trust him. Well, it wasn't enough for Moses. Moses was still doubting. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 1, Moses continued, what if they will not believe or listen to what I say? Saying, you just should reveal yourself to me, God. What about all these Israelites that you're asking me to lead? And God chooses to give Moses a signal, not once, not twice, but 3 times. In verses 2 through 5 in Exodus 4, he asks Moses to do a little bit of an exercise. He's doing a little game with Moses. He said, what's that in your hand? And Moses says, it's a staff. God says, drop the staff. As soon as he drops the staff and it hits the ground, all of a sudden that staff transforms into a snake. Moses is freaking out. And God says, pick it up. So Moses grabs it from the end of the tail, and all of a sudden it's returned as a staff. To reinforce this, and his sign that God is there and that you will be working through my power, Moses, not through your own, God does a second test with him. He says, take your hand, put it in your robe. So Moses did that, and when he pulled it out, his hand was as white as snow, covered in leprosy. God said, put your hand back. He took it out. It was magically healed. Still not enough for Moses. So God said, as a third and final sign, you're going to take water from the Nile River and pour it on the land. And that water will turn into blood. Miraculous sign after miraculous sign. Was that enough? Moses replies to God in verse 10, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past. After seeing God's power on full display, Moses still doubted himself because he was relying on his own accord. This got to the point that if you continue reading in verse 14, the Lord got angry and frustrated with Moses. And Moses was acting old in his faith. He was letting the doubts and fear control him from seeing what was literally right in front of him. And after much deliberation and divine intervention, Moses finally surrendered and relied on God's strength. And that's how God used an imperfect person who had a stutter and turned it into a voice of thunder and was able to do miraculous things. And that's one of the biggest revelations that I've had over my personal reading over the past year and a half, is that when we read the Bible and we read the stories of the heroes and the prophets and the people that God used, we're reading it from a linear standpoint, from the beginning of the story to the end. And it's really easy to be a person like me and point and say, hey, Moses, you're an idiot. But Moses was not an idiot. Moses was someone that God used. It was not an accident. He was using it to teach us the importance of relying on him and his strength and not our own. And that is what's amazing by God, is it's a beautiful illustration of how God uses, in a perfect way, imperfect people who are obedient and fully trust in his plan. God reveals the importance of being young in our faith because we find that identity through him and not our own accord. And we see throughout the Bible amazing ways that God uses young people, since we're talking about Youth Sunday and talking about all the kids that you saw on stage, how he uses young people who are imperfect, but who trust him and have faith in him to do miraculous things. So the first person we're going to talk about is Joseph. Now, I have a very soft spot for Joseph because of 2 accords. 1, my middle name is Joseph. And number 2, for Awana, like 15, 20 years ago, my mother made me a coat of many colors that I wore in Awana. I love Joseph. In reading the Bible, I always thought he was treated a little unfairly, Like, here's this guy, he's a perfect guy, I'm named after him, he's got to be a great guy. And all his brothers are just mean and jealous of him. But if you kind of put some context into the story you're reading, you know that the lineage of Abraham has a lot of dysfunctions in that family. All right, think about, first of all, Abraham and Isaac. I understand it was a commandment from God, but do you think Isaac ever talked about that day that Abraham tried to kill him? That makes a strange dinner table discussion. Jacob and Esau, there's lies, there's deceits, there's people trying to steal each other's birthrights. There's a lot of drama in this family. And Jacob did attribute to it because Jacob had 12 sons, a daughter, and he clearly made it known who his favorite was, which was Joseph. He also liked Benjamin as well. And something I have to ask you guys is, some people might say, my parents don't have a favorite child. I hate to break it to you. If you're not the favorite, if you don't think your parent has a favorite child, you're not the favorite. It's a fact. My family jokes because I know for the fact that my mom's favorite child is my sister Gianna. It's not me. I've come to terms with that. All of my sisters and I felt this feeling that her favorite child was this specific daughter. So we approached her and said, hey, Mom, is Johnny your favorite? And my mom, being the sweet lady she is like, Dylan, I love all of my children equally. And I said, I don't doubt that, but who do you like the most? There's a huge difference. It was a little bit concerning when she was a little quiet about that part. So we all knew, but don't worry, I knew I was in the bottom tier growing up, but I feel like I've made some progress over the years. I think I'm maybe 2 or 3 now. It's like the AP polls for college football. I'm rising to the top. But Jacob is kind of establishing this, the beginning of this story of Joseph is establishing the dynamic, okay, of Joseph. And what makes it really interesting is Joseph adds to it, and that's because of a dream that he had. If you go to Genesis 37, 5 through 7, you might be asking yourselves, well, why are the brothers so mean? Why are they so envious? Why are they so upset with Joseph? Imagine you're at a dinner table, or, let's say it's breakfast. You're at the family table, and someone comes up to you and says this. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, please listen to this dream, which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf stood up and also remained standing. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Imagine one of your siblings coming and saying, I had this dream that you just bowed down and worshiped me? Isn't that crazy? Do you think jealousy would form? Do you think hate would form? They couldn't stand this guy. And when you fast forward in Genesis 37, verses 12 through 14, Jacob, Israel, sends Joseph on a mission to check how his brothers are doing. They're out in the field working really hard, and there's Joseph chilling on the inside of the house with his father because he's the favorite, and he tells him, go check on your brothers. So in verse 12, then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are your brothers not pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send them to you. And he said to them, I will go. Then he said to him, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So imagine you're the brothers in the middle of the hot sun, working hard, sweating. And all of a sudden, from a distance away, you see this little guy with his coat of many colors coming to check in on you. Before he could even be 100 feet away, they're all like, we're going to kill him. We're done. We're going to kill him. If it wasn't for his older brother, Reuben, who basically said, guys, I think it's a little insane that we kill him. Let's teach him a lesson. He would have been dead. So Joseph comes over. They have a confrontation. They throw him in a ditch, and then they sell him into slavery. And what I love about this story is obviously this is stuff that Joseph could not even imagine coming on his radar. He went from his father's favorite son to now being almost killed to now being sold into slavery. But his reaction to it will surprise you. He didn't curse God. He didn't wonder, God, what are you trying to do? He remained diligent and he remained obedient. Again, an imperfect person. He might have been arrogant. He might have been imperfect, but he was faithful to God. To the point that when he was sold into slavery, he actually worked up enough favor into his master, Potiphar. He worked hard. He was diligent. He didn't create any drama. And Potiphar loved him. He was moving him up to the top. And then that temptation, or not temptation, but that situation with Potiphar's wife, And what is Joseph's first reaction when she tries to seduce him? He runs, he flees. He doesn't even flirt with it. You'd think, oh, is God going to reward him for that? He's then thrown into prison. And as he's waiting in prison, again, he is not cursing God. He's not saying, why am I here? God was building an opportunity for Joseph. Joseph would later, through interpreting dreams, find favor in the sight of Pharaoh and make major political choices in terms of the famine in the land going on, giving a plan for the future for them to be able to survive and not get caught off guard by the famine. And what I love is as you read through the story of Joseph, when his brothers come to meet him in Egypt, when he encounters them, he doesn't curse his brothers. He doesn't look at them and say, remember when you guys tried to kill me? What was his response? In Genesis 45, 5 through 8, he says to them, now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me ahead of you to save lives. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to ensure for you a remnant on the earth and keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it is not you who sent me here, but God. What I love about this passage is he's not blaming his brothers. He's not putting the power in his brother's hands saying, you did this to me. He's saying that God did this to open up a door for him to be able to save his family. And so many times we might see an obstacle in our way. We might see a challenge that we're facing and wondering, why is it happening to me? I'm a good person. You start to point fingers. Why is that person treating me that way? Why is this circumstance unrolling the way it is? That we don't realize that God might have something in store for us. That God might be trying to teach us something. So many times we think of God as someone who's trying to avoid us from experiencing obstacles. I don't view him in that light. I view God as someone that when we're in the midst of the obstacle, it's someone that we're able to find hope in, someone that we're able to find faith in and overcome that obstacle. And I can't think of an obstacle any bigger than what David, the next kid that we're discussing, had to deal with. Going back to Joseph, by the way, when he was going through that whole thing, when he was sold into slavery, he was 17 years old. Think about that. David, here, he's between the ages of 12 and 15. Research and records show that he likely didn't stand past 5 feet tall. This kid was going through puberty. Okay, he probably had that little peachy fuzz mustache that kids, I see all the kids at youth group and they think it looks really good. You need to shave it, son. Okay? My dad didn't teach me how to shave. What he did, and it was very Italian, Saturday morning, handed me electric saver and said, once a week, shave it. Guys, that's a separate sermon that we'll talk about on Wednesday. But here's this kid who's sent to the battlegrounds not to be a warrior. He's there just to drop off supplies and just to kind of set up the vibe of what David was entering. You see all of these grown men, these Israelite soldiers, cowering, fearful, embarrassed, just the life taken out of them because of this opposition, this giant who is like 6'8" to 7 feet tall standing in front of them, mocking them. They don't know what to do. They feel lost. And meanwhile, here's this boy, barely 5 feet tall, and his response is basically, put me in, coach. Saul is like, no, this makes no sense. And David says to Saul, in 1 Samuel 17, verses 34, but David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a sheep from the flock, I went out after it and attacked it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it rose up against me, I grabbed it by its mane and struck it and killed it. Your servant was killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God. Two things here that I find insightful is one, at a very young age, David was able to do something I think we all struggle with, whatever our age may be, is the fact that we're put in certain scenarios in life and we're trying to understand, why are we here at this point? You might be wondering, why am I working at this job that I'm not really a big fan of right now? Maybe David was wondering, Why am I a shepherd? Why am I protecting these sheep? And he shows through telling this to Saul that his life experience up to that point is leading him, preparing him for this moment that no one saw on the radar. And the second thing that I love is that David, this is very big in sports, is visualization. You know, they say, picture you hitting the ball and the ball going off your bat and going into the stands for a home run. Picture the ball going through the hoop. Okay, athletes are they visualize. David is showing no sense, no ounce of doubt that he's going to win. This is a 12 to 15-year-old kid. A 12 to 15-year-old kid that couldn't even wear armor because his body wasn't built for it. They tried to put it on him. They strapped him on the armor, and it was so clunky that he couldn't even move, to the point that he faced Goliath without any armor. And in verse 45, when this Philistine looks at him, when Goliath looks at him and mocks him and says, "This is Israel's best response to me?" David doesn't cower. He says to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a saber. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you and remove your head from you." Later in this passage, it says, "For the battle is the Lord's, and he will hand you over to us." This does not sound like an individual who is not meant for this moment. This does not sound like a child who doesn't know what he's doing. This sounds like someone who has full faith in that God will see him through the scenario. This is not an individual that is relying on his own strength, on his own intelligence, on his own creative strategy when it comes to this battle. This is someone who knows that if I step forward, God will have my back. God will see me through. And we might not be facing Goliath, but I'm sure 100% certain that we all are going through an obstacle that feels like it's incapable of overcoming. And when we rely on our own strength, when we try to fight it, we're just making our lives even harder. When we choose to surrender and let go and let God handle the fight, when we're diligent, when we're obedient, that's when we could achieve true victory. And we continue to probably my favorite story that we'll talk about today is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're fast forward a bit, and we're talking about when Babylon is taking over. The Israelites are captive. King Nebuchadnezzar instills this huge monument of gold and requires every time music plays to bow down and worship. And these three boys between the ages of 15 and 17-year-old decide to make a stand. Going back to that youth group verse, do not conform, but be transformed. They saw everyone kneeling down, worshiping. They were the only ones standing up. And they had all the eyes on them. And then when they were encountered, I remember in the scriptures, political leaders saw this and called it to their attention. And before they even said, hey, these guys aren't worshiping, they aren't bowing down, they tried to clarify with the three boys. Is it a mistake? Were you guys not worshiping as you were told to? They had an out. They could have said, oh yeah, that was a mistake, whatever. They reconfirmed, nope, we worship one and only one true God. And this really upset King Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel 3:19, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. Nebuchadnezzar's ego was so irritated that he decided we're going to use this as a lesson for anyone who tries to defy what I've commanded them to do. This fire was so hot that as you continue to read, the guards that threw the boys in died. For this reason, because the king's command was harsh and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what I love about this moment is the scriptures don't talk about that on their deathbed, because there's this appointment of you being thrown into the fire. Again, we don't hear cursing of, God, I was faithful to you. Why aren't you showing me the way? I like to think of the boy's attitude as, go ahead, open the door. I'll walk right in. I'm not going to defy his name. I'll walk right in. Then things change. Something very interesting happens. Verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astounded and stood up quickly. He said to his counselors, was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the middle of the fire? They replied to the king, absolutely, O king. He responded, look, I see 4 men untied and walking about in the middle of the fire, unharmed. And the appearance of the 4th is like the sons of God. And what I like to think of why the boys were saying, let me in, I will walk in, is they saw that 4th person in the fire ready to greet them. And I love, because we talked about this at youth group, Nick made a point to the boys. There's a very interesting word here that stands out when we talk about what they were doing in the fire. They were all tied up and bounded, and they were thrown in. But when you read it, it says, I see 4 men untied and walking about in the middle of the fire. They weren't standing still saying, oh, flames, please don't hurt me, don't burn me, don't burn me. They had a sense of freedom. They could have been playing pickleball for all we know. They were in there enjoying their time, not even thinking about that they were in the middle of a flame that was meant to kill them. And this is just another perfect example of how God uses imperfect people who are obedient to do marvelous and amazing things. And this begs the question that I have for each and every one of you guys, and myself as well. What amazing things is God trying to do through you? Are you being obedient? Are you having faith? Are you acting like a child in your faith, knowing that it doesn't matter what life throws at me, to God for the answers, that I don't have to rely on my own strength and my own will? Or are you growing old in your faith? Are you begging for a sign because you no longer identify yourself in his view as opposed to your own accord? Now, if you are in the latter camp, don't fear. Don't be anxious. I actually want to go back to where we originally started when Jesus was talking about the cure for anxiety with the disciples. Matthew 6:26, he continues telling the disciples, look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather them into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? He continues in verse 31, do not be anxious. What I love about this is when God says something in the Bible, you know he means it, and he's continually to repeat it. Throughout the Bible you read, I'll leave you nor forsake you. He says it over and over and over again. It's a promise, and you know it's true. And in this passage, he repeats once again, do not be anxious in saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or with what shall we clothe ourselves? For your heavenly Father knows that you need all of these things. Now, what's really important about this passage is there's 2 things for us to do. Some people just focus on the first, which is do not be anxious. They're like, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. That's it. God gives us a very, very second important step. In verse 33, he says, after saying, do not be anxious, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And all of these things, all of these worries, all of these doubts, all of these anxieties, all of these thoughts that you have shall be added to you. And that you could find assurance and that you could find comfort. But it requires us to be obedient. It requires us to view ourselves and identify ourselves through him, that we are his children and he is our Father. And what I hope this message instills in you is the fact that when it comes to your faith, you too can rediscover that youthfulness. You know how we're talking about creativity and nostalgia and wanting to re-access that? People just have that innate desire to go back when they were kids. It's the same when we were believers. You might feel really enthusiastic at first. You might feel really passionate. You might feel ready to conquer the world, do anything for the Lord. And then once you start to get hit with obstacles, once you start to see that no matter how hard I try, certain people don't seem to change. No matter how much I try to forgive, I just can't let go of this bitterness I'm feeling. That despite all of that, that when we surrender and let it go to God, He is the ultimate healer. He is the ultimate provider. He is the ultimate Father. And if you feel that you've lost a bit of that, I want to link the creativity with the faith. And just like we talked about those 4 ways of you to rediscover your creativity, we have 4 ways for you to rediscover your faith using kind of the same logic. And you'll see what I'm getting at shortly. The first is music and meditation on God's word. Earlier, we talked about the importance and the link between walking and listening to happy music and how that helps with problem solving. So many times we're in a rush to try to solve our problem or fix our problem that we don't take a minute to stop and see what God thinks. And when it said happy music, it's talking about thinking about things that are happy, a classical noise with a positive vibe, listening to praise and worship, listening to hymns. The other thing I find fascinating is us as humans. You ever go to someone's house and they ask you to take their shoes off? All right? And you do it, and you feel weird, and you got your socks. If you don't have socks, it's even more awkward. Forgot to clip the toenails, sorry. You go through all this. And why? Why do we go through it? Because we want to keep the house clean. We don't want to get dirty. If we go through all that effort to keep the floors of our house dirty, why are we allowing garbage in our minds? With the music we listen to, with the TV shows and the movies that we subject ourselves to. We scroll on Instagram and Facebook and see the toxicity and the anger. We need to replace that and take a cue of what Paul told the Philippians, to think upon what is true, to think about what is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is good repute. So that's step 1. Step 2 ties closely to it, to rest and reflect. Research shows that when we jump into solving a problem immediately, it's a little more effective to take a moment and think about it, to think about all possible avenues. So the next time you're faced with a creative task, not creative task, but next time you're faced with an obstacle in your faith, take a moment and not try to be like a bull in a china shop running at 100 miles per hour. Give it some thought. Pray. Ask God for direction. Thirdly, islands of isolation and turning them into islands of association. We talked about practicing creativity, building your muscles, and through the process of collaboration. We have to do the same things as Christians, as a church. God created us as a community, not as just one believer, but as a community to be able to help the brother and the sister sitting to the left and the right of you. To not just focus on your own problems, but be able to see how you could positively impact another person's life. To turn those islands of isolations into islands of association. What's the practical way you do that? After church, not immediately run to your car and go get lunch. Talk to people. Find out how you could pray for them. Make an investment. So many people in church say they go and they don't feel like people are friendly, or they don't feel like, people are asking me how you're doing. Instead of the pointing the finger, see what you're doing. Are you making an effort to reach out to someone? Are you trying to strike up a conversation and get past the superficial syrupiness and actually get at what's at their heart and what they're struggling at or what they need help with? And when we open ourselves to working together, to collaborate, being open to other people's perspectives, even though we might not 100% agree with them, that will help us in our own faith to reinforce our own beliefs and to be able to open up ourselves to other perspectives. And lastly, the fourth, perspective and power. Reevaluating the struggle or obstacle that you're facing and viewing it in a different light. One of my favorite verses that I like to think of is in James, where it tells us to consider it a joy, my brethren, when you experience various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. So many times we focus on what's going wrong and why is this happening to me, Replace those thoughts with how can this be fixed and what can I learn from it? What are the positivity I could find through this? Paul teaches us in 2 Corinthians, for momentary light affliction is producing us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Just like Joseph, he went through that imprisonment to only be able to provide for his family. In other words, temporary discomfort leads to eternal joy. And when we think we're missing out on something and that we're not even close to God, we come to realize that when we're obedient and faithful, God has so much more in store for us than we could possibly imagine. With that, I'd just like to encourage you guys that those are the 4 ways to rediscover your faith. Before we start with the last song of praise and worship, we're going to go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for the amazing and all-powerful, all-knowing, omniscient, omnipotent God that you are. What we love, Father, and what the goal of today's message is us finding identity through you. Life has so many things throwing our ways that we can't expect, so many obstacles, so many challenges, so many distractions, so many responsibilities, Father, that they could consume us, that we could fall into that never-ending cycle of the unknown of how am I going to get through this, Father? And I just pray that no matter what everyone is going through, whether they're facing a Goliath in their life, whether they feel an ultimate high in their relationship right now and they're ready to praise the Lord, that we know faith fluctuates. There's the ups and the downs, there's the ebbs and the flows, and there's the highs and the lows, Father. And I just pray that we would remember that you're that constant parent. You're that Father in our lives that we're able to look up to and seek direction, to be able to seek assistance, that we're able to be young in our faith and unashamedly call you our fathers, Father, that we don't try to identify ourselves in our social status and what job we do and how much following we have on social media, on how much money we make, Father. But we identify ourselves through the incredible and impeccably perfect gift that you've given us, the salvation of Jesus Christ, dying on that cross in the sin. And that wasn't done for Jesus' glory. That was done because of love, Father. That was done because there was an inseparable division between us and you because of sin, Father. And Jesus put his own life on the line because you want a rich and meaningful relationship with us. Help us not treat our week as just another week that goes by until we're on church on Sunday, Father. Again, next week. Help us take today's message and turn it into tomorrow's mission. Help us grow in our faith. Help us not focus on power, on ego, on wealth, and on strength, but help us fully surrender and let go. Help us rely on your strength. Help us continue to walk as you guide the light. And we love you, Father. We thank you, and we praise you in your heavenly name. Amen. And before we start praise and worship, everyone can please stand. I want to share a passage very briefly of a verse that I think applies to the next song that we're about to sing that speaks to not growing old in our faith, but fully surrendering and letting go. It's in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. Do you not know, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives strength to the weary, and to the one who lacks might, he increases power. Through you, though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run, and they will not get tired. They will walk, and they will not become weary.
For the joy of innocence, dreaming things that don't make sense. keep me as a child, and for the things we left behind, the space between our hearts and minds, and keep me as a child, for we've grown older than our guide. We've grown older than our guide. You are forever young, bright morning star, an unsetting sun. You are forever young. Hear our Father singing out to us when we've grown older than our God. And for the gift of mountains high, open fields and running wild, keep me as a child. And for the times we've locked our doors, built up walls and started wars, and keep me as a child. For we've grown older than our mind. We've grown older than our God. But you were forever young, bright morning star, an unsetting sun. You were forever young. Here I find them singing out to us when we've grown older than our God. Love is running towards the shadows, dying, rising like an echo, growing younger in surrender, letting go. Love is running towards the shadows, dying, rising like an echo, growing younger in surrender. I'm letting go. Love is running towards the shadows, dying, rising like an echo, growing younger in surrender. I'm letting go. Eternity is mine when we've grown older than our God. Eternity is through His blood when we've grown older than our God.
Well, thanks for joining us for Youth Sunday, and hope you have a great rest of the day.